Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. Going to look at a paper that is an article in Press as of March 7th, 2025 in the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine. The title of the article is Lessons Learned from the Digital Transformation of Physiotherapy Education, a Phenomenological Study. Now, this is in the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine, although it focuses on the specific experiences of UK-based physiotherapy students. The reason that it's going to have some relevance to osteopathic education or the osteopathic project, such as in the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine, is because physiotherapy is going to have similar teaching practices as a hands-on profession to osteopathy. Excuse me, clearing my throat. The first thing to note about this particular paper is it is, as a phenomenological study, it is qualitative in its nature. There are multiple mentions in the paper, maybe not multiple, one mention for sure, about the concept of reflexivity. So the author group is going to acknowledge that their preferences of thought and approach are going to impact how they interpret the data and the information presented. They do note that there was some feedback given during the peer review process that they did not necessarily fully take on and redo anything, but they acknowledged that it existed and they acknowledged that it allowed them to reconsider some things. So you have to understand that anything that you find from this acknowledges completely that reproduction of this may be hard because whoever would attempt to reproduce this is not the author group as it stands. So the preferences of another author group may alter what is identified, say from the same process or with the same subjects or with the same data. So that is a built-in acknowledged limitation of anything that does this. So they're looking at I'll read the abstract and I'll run through a bit of the paper. It will allow me to lean into things that I learned about health professions or health science education, and also suggest how we can use a different set of constructs to possibly leverage this better. And as a minor spoiler, one of the constructs is, as far as inculcating skills and abilities in people who do not currently have them or need to build them, does not necessarily benefit in skill acquisition or knowledge acquisition from asking them how they feel about the process. How they feel about the process is what I'll call a customer service construct. It matters because if the experience is so bad that I tell everybody else about it, they won't approach it. There may be highly valuable skills in the program, but it's so annoying to get them that people will turn away from it. So for the delivery and inculcation of knowledge and skills, students' feelings don't matter. Students' feelings do matter for their willingness and ability to approach a program and stick with the program. Okay, so I'm noting that feelings absolutely matter, but not for the thing that often researchers and students alike would think, right? So I'll read this really quickly, the abstract. Not the whole thing. Yeah, we'll read the objective portion. So to read, the COVID-19 pandemic changed education globally with a rapid reduction of in-person learning and increase in e-learning. This was challenging for students with themes of poor motivation, reduced engagement, and difficulty translating knowledge into practical skills. Although COVID-19 restrictions have been removed in the UK, increased e-learning is likely to be permanently integrated into healthcare programs by most UK universities. Most. Therefore, programs need to evaluate their e-learning to learn lessons for the future. This study aimed to understand physiotherapy students' experiences of e-learning and what, if any, specific topics were more challenging and why they felt this was the case to identify how e-learning can be developed to meet their needs. Okay, so that last sentence, their feelings and their needs, okay? Anything that is drawn as a conclusion from the way that this was done is not their needs in learning skills. It is their needs in feeling okay with continuing to engage. So this is not about improving skill outcomes. This is about allowing for feelings to be in a place where you would predict that they will not disengage. This is not about abilities. This is about engagement, okay? Now, whether or not the authors interpret it this way, the construct that they're looking at is maintenance of engagement, which could also be crossed over into the term motivation. So you can use multiple terms. Motivation to continue, you can turn into the term engagement. But this is about engagement. This is not about skills and abilities, okay? I want to say that I think with the methodology that they used, the job they did was absolutely fine. They acknowledged all of the challenges that they should have acknowledged, but there's other stuff that would underpin the actual delivery of skills and abilities and knowledge that can coexist as high-level outcome drivers with the maintenance of motivation and engagement, okay? So I don't need to read that, blah, blah, blah. No, don't need to read that. So I'm just kind of scrolling, so please excuse. Sampling and recruitment, don't need to do that because I think they did, their methods were fine. I don't really have anything to say about their methods. Data analysis, no. It's thematic analysis. So thematic analysis, essentially, there's a bunch of words on paper. What you do is acknowledge that people will use different words to point at the same theme or the same phenomenon. So you get a bunch of people, or maybe a small group of people, to code or use terms that would encompass the thing that somebody was trying to say. So you normalize a bunch of different words into a theme or a construct, aka an ontological category, right? So a lot of words point to the same thing. If I had a big list of things, it would be like a spreadsheet. So the theme would be, say, in the vertical column over here, or say on the left of the screen if you happen to write in English, and then all the subjects, and what you would do in the subject, say subject 1, subject 2, subject 3 box, what you would do is you would sort of put a highlighted quote that properly responds to the theme as proof that they all pointed to the same theme with different words, right? It would be something like that. Blah, 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 blah. Don't need to do that. The results. Okay. So the results, the themes, okay? We want to talk about the themes, the 4 themes that were identified: connected but disconnected, collaborative disengagement, engagement, right? Practicality for professional identity, disembodiment with anatomy. Now, with respect to professional identity formation, students are probably not people to ask, okay? You can retrospectively ask somebody who's a professional about how they feel about professional identity formation when a student, but there's going to be very limited validity or generalizability of any of those statements. It's just sort of how I feel after I did something. But yeah, students are not going to provide fantastic insight into how they're developing an identity that they don't fully embody yet. And when they do embody it, they're probably not going to do a great job of telling you how they got there necessarily. That's why you would need a lot of people and normalize that data. And you can do it, but it's very unwieldy, or it's very difficult and challenging. Yeah, for disembodiment with anatomy. That's the one that I might end up having the most insight into because of some of the things and people that I've had the opportunity to speak with respect to anatomy learning, especially at McMaster. The gentleman who runs the program there has one of the coolest names of all time, Dr. Bruce Wayneman. And if you slow it down, it's Dr. Bruce Wayne Man, aka Batman, or Batman's alter ego. Maybe Batman is Bruce Wayne's alter ego, whatever, however you want to look at that. But Dr. Bruce Wayneman has done some really interesting stuff with respect to the comparison in performance outcomes with anatomy learning with respect to 2D drawings, so drawings on paper, pictures, virtual reality, immersive stuff versus cadavers. Well, no, actually not versus cadavers. I don't think they learned on the cadavers. I think a lot of the work was also done with 3D plastic models, and his lab has done a lot of work looking at the size of the 3D model and what seems to produce the best outcomes for learning, tests of learning, right, or accuracy, things like that, okay? 3.1, connected but disconnected. I'll read a little bit here. The first theme, digital connections were an established part of most of the students' everyday lives before the pandemic. However, the rapid change of both social and learning activities moving to a predominantly online world affected their balance between real-life connections and digital ones. So really simply, I don't need to spend a lot of time here. In-person interaction is legitimately important for a lot of things. Virtual interactions may lack a large amount of communicative information that will happen in person. So to behave as if virtual connection, regardless of how high fidelity, of how much visual, auditory, and other sense information can be conveyed, there's communicative information that is missing. It is a problem. It will not in any way replace person-to-person connection. Technology cannot do this. It can do a great job with strong limits, but in-person connection does make a difference. Growing an interpersonal network, a network of knowledge, you could say communities of practice, if you like that term, those things do benefit heavily from in-person connection. It makes a large difference. I don't need to spend a lot of time there. Collaborative disengagement, this is the second theme. I'm going to read this to start. The second interconnected theme was developed from the building sense of student frustration with each other when required to work together in collaborative tasks. Students with expectations of shared effort and equal contributions found that the actual reality of group work differed, with others not seen to be contributing. The misalignment of expectation and reality resulted in growing frustration over time. Students identified that as a result, their own contributions progressively dissolved. This doesn't sound like an online thing. This sounds like group work. Like this is just kind of group work. If you examined group work in high school, group work in primary grades, group work in university, group work in offices, this sounds about right. Now, some people apparently said, oh, hold on. This might be of some interest to try to expand on for anybody. However, I'm going to read again. However, some students experienced this differently. Whilst their peers perceived a reluctance to participate and felt frustrated, others expressed that their personal barrier to engaging actively was linked to fear of judgment and anxiety of being exposed to the group. So maybe as an underlying motivation, that's actually a pearl that could be expanded upon if anybody had psychological and behavioral research aspirations. That is interesting. It's probably already well written about in educational group work research, but that would actually be interesting. Anyways, to move on to the third one, practicality for professional identity. I'll read this. The participants had developed their own concept of what it meant to be a physiotherapist and felt a strong connection between the practical hands-on experiences that they had been exposed to within learning and teaching before the pandemic and their evolving professional identity. However, even though practical teaching was continued throughout 2020-21 lockdowns, the changes to the practical hands-on delivery to a more condensed format did not align and reinforce their concept of professional identity, causing a sense of doubt in the effectiveness of the learning. This is almost more cultural and expectation based. Everybody before me, okay, so this is me taking a caricatured position. Everybody before me did it hands-on, so if I don't do it the way they did it, then I can't possibly be one of them. I'll never be accepted. I'll never know as much as they do. They'll be so much better than me. No, not necessarily. The thing that drives performance is the availability of required information. If you have the required information and the motivation, you will figure it out on your own. It may not be somebody else's path, or you may not judge it as somebody else's path previous to you, prior to you, but it'll get you there. So this is feelings. It's not going to necessarily impact the possible appropriate outcome. If it hurts your feelings enough, you'll disengage, and that will take you away from the availability of the required information. So this isn't an actual performance hurdle or an identity forming hurdle. It's a feeling hurdle. And if the feelings are hurt hard enough, you will disengage and you will have lower outcomes. So that is where the connection will matter, but it's not necessarily a giant thing. Some things need to be hands-on. If you're going to, in osteopathy or in physiotherapy, treat hands-on, which you kind of have to do, you need to do that in person. There's no substitute. It's not an option. Whereas anatomy, physiology, theory, history, any topic that is knowledge-based only, that doesn't necessarily need to be tested with an interaction between two humans where one human is assessing and interacting with another, you can do that online. That's not an issue. The people will have feelings about it, but it can be done online. What I should say about that, and why I say it can be done online, is because we can develop the term or the construct or the category of common learning resource. Most people are highly familiar with textbooks as a common learning resource. Novels, say in an English course, the novel that you're reading is a common learning resource. You will be asked questions to abstract out of it, and those questions will be given to everybody. The questions themselves, the worksheets, are a common learning resource. We're all being asked to perform an activity in relation to the same thing. Tests are common learning resources. A common learning resource can be a video. If we all are asked to watch the same video and answer the same questions about the video, that is a common learning resource. If the video contains the information required to understand a piece of anatomy, and the questions are also geared towards the same thing, and the tests are geared towards that resource, and judging whether or not somebody had ingested the information and can regurgitate it appropriately, then asynchronous and online is fine. The common learning resource is always used asynchronously, and students will use it in variable ways depending on their needs or their perceived needs and their motivation. So a better way to say that is people who think they need to go through material more will go through material more as long as they have access to it. People who think they need to go through it less will go through it less. People who are scared may feel like they need to go through it more. People who are highly confident may feel like they need to go through it less, and that will do what it does. When they get the feedback from the test that they did what they wanted to do or they didn't do what they wanted to do, they will adjust their behavior in relation to the common learning resource. The way that motivation is highly likely to affect this is if you're pissing people off in school or in your in-person interactions or your virtual interactions. If you're impacting their motivation, they may disengage. The motivation is where the feelings matter. So the delivery method for the information can be variable. There's a lot of different ways to get the information to people, the required information. But if you are at the same time impacting their motivation, you're going to have a problem. What you would hope for is that if it is a post-secondary program, people have self-sorted to the degree that they will engage with the material, and that if there is an asynchronous nature to it, that they will eventually start to recognize of their own volition or on their own terms that they're not keeping up with material. I will tell you from experience that that is a highly variable thing. People's motivation is different, people's lives are different, their ability to identify and acknowledge that they could be doing more, they don't need to maybe do as much, that's variable. If you lean into that, expect variance between people. Expect that they will just do it different, right? Now, if at the same time as that you're doing other things that disconnect them from the ability to be motivated, then you should expect that most people will disengage. If you're not doing anything to disconnect them or demotivate them, then they'll just engage variably, is the best way to put it. There's nothing that you can do that will motivate everybody to perform the same way. What you will do is maybe not screw it up. So the best way to say it, you're probably going to see your best results if you don't demotivate people, if you don't piss them off. You're probably going to see normal results if you try to motivate them too much. If you do anything too much, you may actually turn some people off because it's like you're too enthusiastic. So there is a fine line to be walked. Basically, if you're relatively neutral, you won't likely overly motivate or overly demotivate and see the variance. So you'll just see normal variance. Might be the best prediction that I could make based on what I've seen as an educator so far. Yeah. So the common construct that allows us to point to is common learning resource. if you appropriately understand online materials as a common learning resource that students should be allowed to engage with ad nauseum or as much or as little as they want, then that's probably very appropriate. Teachers tend to overestimate the value of their in-person lesson. What they don't seem to value appropriately is that if you are speaking to a group of people, they will ingest the material differently. Then they go home to the common learning resource, and with whatever level of motivation they have, they engage with the common learning resource. And that's what drives more performance, seemingly, than the actual lesson. So no matter how well you craft the lesson, somebody's going to love it, somebody's going to hate it, and there's going to be a lot of gray in between. So the common learning resource is probably the thing to lean into the most, because the students who are motivated will do a lot with it. The students who are less motivated will do less with it, and you'll see your general variability, which you're not going to engineer around much. Yeah. Okay. The theme of professional identity development would probably be better boiled down to engagement, right? That's probably a better place to look at that. Now, if I look at the final theme, the disembodiment with anatomy, I'll read here again. The final theme interconnects with practicality for professional identity. I'll read again, please excuse me. The final theme interconnects with practicality for professional identity. Prior to the pandemic, students learned anatomy with a combined theoretical and practical approach encompassing tactile experiences such as deconstructing and constructing models, participating in pro-section laboratory sessions, and palpation of anatomical structures on each other. Following the transition of anatomy learning to the virtual environment, tactile experiences were limited. Other resources were used to support learning, including teaching, including three-dimensional images and dissection videos. However, the students' discussion demonstrated a sense of disembodiment with this approach, which made anatomy challenging to understand. Asking them about how challenged they felt is kind of useless, because people will have all kinds of feelings. Somebody can perform at a world record level and say that they felt bad. So there's a disconnect between performance outcomes, measurable performance outcomes, and feelings. I can tell you that with high-level athletes, they can feel fantastic and perform poorly, feel horrible and perform fantastic, and all kinds of shades of gray in between. So that, as a construct, isn't all that valuable for insight into how to deliver information. It is valuable for the engagement portion. The engagement portion matters. How you treat people, how you interact, how they feel about the experiences will go to engagement. There is no experience you're going to engineer which is going to have the same level of engagement for everybody. So if you use sound educational principles and you don't piss people off too much, they'll probably engage the way they would normally engage. It's sort of like a neutral flavor. It's not going to make anybody too happy. It's not going to make anybody too sad. With respect to anatomy learning, what we seem to be seeing with the research that's coming out of McMaster from the lab of Dr. Bruce Wainman is that for measurable outcomes in learning anatomy, three-dimensional models that the person doesn't have to touch seem to outperform all other forms of anatomy learning, whether it's immersive VR, whether it's three-dimensional videos, right, or things that the student can manipulate digitally. Two-dimensional images are the classic standard, pro-section labs, things like that. So the tactile sense, as far as I can recall, doesn't seem to make much of a difference. It doesn't improve learning. It doesn't reduce learning outcomes or performance outcomes, measurable performance outcomes. The thing that seems to do the best is something that is physically three-dimensional, that can be in front of the person. And if somebody else can turn it for me, rotate it for me, that's essentially top-level learning material. You can have a discussion with respect to hands-on professions, how much they really need to understand anatomy. The assumption is that they need to understand it deeply because all of the movements that they're going to do in the external environment of observation and the superficial stuff, they need to understand the deep stuff so they really understand what's deeply going on. We can go to another article from the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine, which is really more of an opinion piece, the anatomical possibilism article. Just because the anatomy's there doesn't mean that moving it does what you say that it does. So that matters. So we can have a discussion as professions the depth to which we really have to understand anatomy to apply our interventions based on movement assessments to this person, and our ability to generate an ad hoc story or a story after the fact may be dependent on that anatomy to some degree, but we should have a discussion as to how important it is. But if you want to talk about teaching anatomy, they don't have to touch it. There's nothing that seems to beat a plastic model that can be rotated in 3 dimensions. One of the problems with immersive technology, especially virtual reality technology, is it's expensive. Another problem is that it seems like if people need correction for their vision, they're more likely to have motion sickness. So if they put on virtual reality goggles or something else that's going to make it immersive, if they have prescription eyewear, the stronger the prescription seems to predict the more likelihood that they'll feel nauseous, get motion sickness. Now, that may not hold. It's possible that there will be technological workarounds. I don't know for sure, but it's my understanding right now is that that does happen. 2D anatomy drawings seem to do fine. Like they perform okay. There's also Dr. Wayman's lab has done work. So other people in the lab have done the work. He's part of it, but other people in the lab have also done the work whereby they look at transfer appropriate processing. So if you learn in one modality, will it transfer over to another? Or if you learn in that modality and you get tested in that modality, is that the best? It seems like no matter what you do, a 3D plastic model that can rotate, that can be rotated, but you don't have to be able to be the one that rotates it, seems to just outperform everything right now. And they've looked at the sizes because they can 3D print them. So they've actually looked at the impact of size. And some things seem to do better when they scale up, and some things seem to do fine at the scale that they would normally occur. So the themes in that article, the article that we're discussing, really, if you're asking students about their feelings about any change in the delivery of education, what you really are probably talking about is engagement. Or really, you're talking about predictive elements for disengagement. Anytime you change things, people are going to have an opinion. Some people will be more likely to engage, some people will be more likely to disengage, and you'll see variability in between those things. So asking people these questions doesn't necessarily teach you anything about how they will do anything to performance outcomes. What it will teach you something about is the rate at which people will disengage. So online learning is very powerful if you look at it the right way. For knowledge-only subjects, online learning is best described as an asynchronous or as unasynchronous resource, a resource that people can access at any time and will access at the level and frequency that they feel they need based on many parts of their personality with respect to their motivation. So you're not going to control that. But if you give them the information immediately and at any time that they want it or need it, they will engage. When they get the feedback based on performance measures that they're not performing at the level that they want to, they will re-engage with that material. So online learning is very, very powerful for knowledge subjects. For things that require the interaction between physical people, it needs to be in person. So essentially, all of that rambling and that entire article, I can just say to that article, they did a good job with the methods they had. With the methods they had, their findings were seemingly appropriate. Really, I think they're talking about engagement. The themes that they have kind of don't matter. They all boil down to really more so propensity for disengagement with change. So engagement, disengagement, you can call it a spectrum, you can call it a theme, you can call it a construct or a category. With respect to the online learning, if you understand it appropriately, treat it like it's an asynchronous resource that people will engage with to their liking and to their motivation. When they get feedback that they're not performing where they want, they will tend to adjust and re-engage with the material. So hopefully you got something from that. Thank you for listening thus far. For myself, I got the ability to re-engage previous knowledge, to better my semantic network, to understand better what the heck is going on with the profession with respect to printed literature. And it's beneficial for me. So again, thank you for listening this far. Hopefully you got something from it, and we'll talk again soon.